So, good afternoon. My name is Courtney Gardner. I'm the executive director here at the Pearl Venture Museum, and I have the pleasure to talk with the artists that are showcased in her gallery right now with the exhibit Pulped Under Pressure, the art of handmade paper. Rennie, why don't you tell us a little bit about this exhibit?
All right, well, first, I want to thank the Pearl Fincher Museum for the Arts for hosting the exhibition. It looks really lovely in your space, and for everyone who's helped work on it, including you, Courtney, and Terry Capps and Emily Guerra. You've all been so super helpful, and it's been just a pleasure to be working with you. Today, with me, I can introduce myself, Rennie Gower, a curator director of Wiley Contemporary Inc., which is a corporation that organizes traveling exhibitions, and Melissa Potter, who is an associate professor at Columbia College Chicago. She's been the co-curator with me for this amazing project. And then we have also two of the other artists in the exhibition with us today, Marilyn Propp, who is the co-founder of the Center for Collaborative Research in Kenosha, Wisconsin, formerly out of Chicago with Anchor Graphics. And then Julia Goodman, last but not least, who's an independent artist out in Berkeley, California, and working with handmade paper and sugar beets. So it's a very interesting group of women that came together with this project, and it started when I was invited by Melissa to come to Columbia College Chicago with another one of my projects called Paper Cuts. And at that time, I was given access and a tremendous amount of help in the paper studio to create some handmade paper works that I had never ever had the opportunity to explore before. And these are some of the results that came out of that residency, if you will. And when I was there, I met Julia and I met Marilyn, and Melissa and I go way back to her time as a student at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I have taught and since retired a couple of years ago. So when I got the results of my paper works, I was really excited and was looking for an opportunity to show them. These are the paper cuts that the pulp paper was based upon. And I reached out to a regional gallery and they were interested, but they wanted something that was more expansive. So I asked them if I could curate something for them. And they agreed. And then I roped in Melissa, and then we brainstormed what would be a really amazing exhibition. And it turned out that it incorporated these 7 women artists, all working with handmade paper, and all who have had some connection to the handmade paper facility at Columbia College Chicago. Melissa, do you want to add anything to that?
That was pretty expansive. I mean, I would also just like to point out that I think the show reflects what was a really kind of magical and explosive moment of creativity happening at the center. The students who were coming through the MFA in book and paper were really extraordinary people, and were very devoted to a deep dive into the materials and concepts of this medium. And so I'm, as a professor of this institution, I'm very proud to see the work of the people who have graduated from this program and explore the diversity. I think it's most unusual work in that way in terms of its breadth and variety. I also want to point out that Julia taught in the program as well during my sabbatical. And so she had the opportunity as well to work with these students. And Marilyn's husband, David, got his MFA in the program and did some really amazing work at that time as well. But the center also was a place where we could invite people like Rennie to come and work. And as anybody who's worked in a collaborative studio knows, ideas are exponential when people who come without the skills in that particular medium and come to explore the potential. It's just a very exciting opportunity. So that was my experience with Rennie, who came back twice, who was in the studio twice. Once was not enough. But.
Yeah, once is never enough, never enough. So we were thinking about paper, of course, as the common denominator between all the work. But we also wanted to showcase how different artists utilize paper with very specific notions about what they want to make their work about. And the work is very diverse in that way in terms of its content, but it's also very connected in terms of the artist dealing with very pressing issues that that we're dealing with in our contemporary culture. And that's where the title of the piece of the show came about. So not only does the paper have to be pressed under an enormous amount of pressure to get the excess water out, but a lot of the other media that are brought to bear on this handmade paper also requires pressure, through printmaking or all kinds of content that is actually hitting on pressure points that we conceive, that we're dealing with. So we're on the wall right now with Marilyn's work. So if you broaden out a little bit, that might be a good segue to let Marilyn talk about her work, Notes from the Sea, and how she sees that playing out with the theme of the show. Marilyn?
Okay, first of all, thank you all, and especially thank you to Rennie and Mel for this fantastic show that's been going all over the country. I just wanted to add that the Center for Collaborative Research is now back to Anchor, but it's Anchor Press Paper and Print, AP3, and we will be in Milwaukee opening our shop, hopefully soon. So yeah, I stumbled into paper kind of late in my career. I've been a painter for 50 years, and I was teaching at Columbia College for 14 years and decided to take some paper making classes. So that was 2012, 2013. And I fell in love with it. I just fell in love with making paper. And when I moved away from Chicago 5 years ago up to Wisconsin, I just started making paper exclusively. My work is really about the coexistence between the industrial and the natural world. And that's been something that I've been concerned with since before the Gulf oil spill in 2010. So the work is still about this, industrial waste blocking the flow of sea life. Before all of this, my machine parts were sort of whimsical, but they are still somewhat whimsical, but they are morphing more and more so that they not only morph into marine life, and sometimes marine life morphs into machine parts, but they are now in the way of these sea turtles. And sea turtles are sort of an ancient symbol of longevity and perseverance, overcoming obstacles. So in a way, they're also kind of a reflection on the artist's life. Everything I do now is circles. It's like a microscopic view or a porthole into the undersea world, or it could be it's like cell division. My new pieces actually have cells working around the outside, and it represents connectedness, continuity. And handmade paper is so much a part of the undersea world. The way paper is made, it's all about water. The pulp is wet, you form it, you press it, you dry it. After it's dry, I then put relief blocks on the surface. Some of the larger work currently, it's gotten so large, I cut out my relief prints and collage them onto the work, onto the paper. But the paper itself, there's a texture and a color to it. I use a lot of pulp painting. I will press the pigment into the forming paper through a grid. So when it dries, it actually has a texture to it. And then when I print the linoleum or wood blocks onto it, there's a crispness to the imagery against that texture and that color. So the materiality of the paper has become very important to me. And I always like to say I present images of beauty while reflecting on destruction. I kind of lure people in and then they go, oh my gosh, what's happening here? So that's really what the pieces are about. I'm pretty much making pieces that are almost 40 by 40 inches now. So, and some very translucent abaca that can hang in windows with the light coming through.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's
It's
the work.
interesting also that your work isn't framed in any way. It's floating there, and off the surface of the wall. And it has this sense of, moving in space, being very animated along with the imagery. And
Yeah,
they are very seductive and beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you get in
I actually
close.
paint every
Pardon?
single magnet. I paint every single magnet to match the surface of the paper.
Yeah, I know that.
A little crazy. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So maybe Courtney, you can move the camera to another location and we can see what comes up next.
There we go. The seeds and service.
All right, so Mel, this is going to be you talking.
Yeah,
about-
I'll do a twofer because I see the two Shetty rugs next door. So I think Rennie is like this to some degree as well, but I don't make a big distinction between my teaching and my work. I mean, I've really devoted my career to being creative in pedagogy because I work in media that are largely unexplored. So if I'm going to teach them well, I have to push boundaries around what their implications are. So it's been pretty natural for me to create long-term relationships with people who've graduated from the program, and all the people who are in this program are people I count as very near and dear. Maggie and I, they developed a papermaker's garden, which was a student, Alex Borgen and Jillian Bruschera, were the graduate students who founded the original garden, which was on an empty lot here at Columbia, Chicago. And Maggie and I knew I was going to have to take it over because my job is ever expanding. And Maggie and I were driving in the car. I said, Maggie, what would it take for the two of us to take over 5 beds? And so we cooked up the idea of seeds in service, which is the idea of seed to sheet, taking the process of hand paper making all the way back to its origins and studying the ethnographic and social and cultural histories that are embedded in all of that. So our collaborations, Maggie was very interested for a while working with the Zapatista community who steward very particular kinds of corn. I was working with the Jane Addams Hull House, which is a cult favorite here in Chicago. It's certainly, it's my temple. But they had the first seed bank here in the city of Chicago, and we sourced a bunch of our seeds from there. And I started exploring the histories of the Hull House workers through that work as well. So that was a 5-year project, which we still do things together. We still garden together, but this was a 5-year project. This particular project is a bit dark, but I think a really important one, looking at invisible histories, which is a big part of my work overall, and trying to farm them for things that are happening concurrent that we don't know about that can be really inspirational and thought-provoking. This is the story of the Hull House workers who were inventorying the area of the papermaker's garden back at the turn of the century, and discovered that there were 65 brothels on the location. But what was interesting to me about that wasn't that it was brothels, but that rather my students were engaging a sex work as work conversation along lines that they thought were of the moment. And I found it really fascinating and amazing that we can trace this work back 100 years, and that this was a really radical act, and that the histories of these women as the founder of our school and all the women who've worked on this land before are present with us, and they are important to the ecology of the city and how we understand our own history in this amazing city. I think in some ways farming this has also led me into conversations around indigeneity and the Potawatomi people. And so, alongside that, you can go to the Tusheti rugs pieces. Alongside of that, I'm always studying women's textile crafts. It took me a really long time to locate my work as really adjacent to fiber, not print. In print, paper is always a servant. And in textiles, paper is worshipped as a goddess. And so it now makes perfect sense to me that so much of my work is mashing these things together. So I'm really interested in rug, embroidery, bed covering, quilting, all the methodologies that women traditionally have done in textiles, and I consider paper to be an integral part of that conversation. I farm the symbol systems because they are a language of their own. Many of these symbol systems we take for granted as common quilt themes and even blanket and basket making themes from the indigenous communities, but internationally they come down to what I describe as save my crops, save my people, save my children. They're about the evil eye, they're about goddesses and things that are pre-Christian. This image is a spinning wheel. That one actually is a spinning wheel, but the spinning wheel also has a goddess, and her name is Mokosh. And so all these things are intertwined, and these practices were also considered very spiritual. So I've never tired of rug and quilt symbolism, and am continuing that work now. These have L wires embedded in them. I also really enjoy sort of the absurdity of materiality, and my colleague, Paul Catanese, who teaches at Columbia College Chicago, wanted to do a project called Handmade Media. And so we cooked up this idea to experiment with L wires embedded in paper. Now I'm experimenting with L wires woven into tapestries with handmade paper as well. So.
Yeah, fantastic. So much to unpack there, Mel, but for the sake of time, Courtney, can you move to the rag sorter wall? Oh, it's way back there. Well, this gives us a nice overview as we get there. And as we're walking up close, these are Julia's pieces.
Yeah, and I couldn't ask for a better tie-in than Mel's conversation around the rugs and the relationship between paper and textiles. And also, before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you and to Rennie and Mel for putting this show together. And part of why I wanted to do this today was just to see all your faces. I feel like
It's been a while.
I've been in
in
a parenting cave, and I'm coming out, and it's nice to see you guys. So thank you. Is my connection?
See the text if you can.
Hello, am I back in the cave?
Julia, where'd you go?
Julia, we can hear you if you want. I mean, if you need to turn
okay,
your video off.
Great.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, here I am. So let's see, I feel like I have there are two foundational projects in my work with handmade paper, and one is the heart of my work and one is the head, the brain. And this body of work comes from the brain foundation of my work, which was, I went to California College of the Arts as a MFA in textiles, knowing I was going to do paper making there. That was the decision I made going into graduate school. There was no paper making program there. And so I studied the history of textiles there, came out, and with that lens that was set up for me, started diving into the history of paper making more deeply. And I was really taken by the history of rag paper making. And I proposed for a residency at Recology, which is the San Francisco dump, to make art about the history of rag paper at the dump, researching, but at the same time pulling fabric from the dump, tearing it up, pulping it, and then making work along those lines. That was representational of that timeline. In my mind, I thought the work would all be very historical, but as I was there, I just started having conversations and asking questions. And I was, I should say that the line of the history that I was interested in is all the places where women were part of making rag paper making, both as the gatherers of rags at home and also as the rags, often the rag sorters at the paper mills. And in my time at the dump, I discovered that there was actually a room of women at the dump of rag sorters until 1968. And those women were nowhere in the official books. They were not visible to the public. Although there is, when I would talk to older people, they have memories of gathering rags and recycling rags with the city. But the garbage men would bring the rags to a room. The room was all Italian women, immigrant, mostly older, almost all speaking in Italian together. And many of them were the family members of the garbage men. And so there's this timeline that I think starts in 1666, but it ends in 1968. And this piece is called Rag Sorters 1968. And there are 7 pieces, and each piece is the name of a woman. There were only 7 names that this man I interviewed remembered of the women rag sorters, and so each piece is one of those 7 names. And I should say it's kind of hard to understand what they are, but I in addition to pulling fabrics to make the pulp from, I also found old printed material that was pre-1968, and I kind of readapted that print to spell out each of the women's names and the decorative elements from those paper pieces. For example, Rita Bianchi is based on the program from an opera brochure. And so I reorganized the letters, carved them all backwards by hand, and then cast them with pulp from the fabrics that I had gathered from the dump. And for me, and I could go back further, but I won't, but using pulp and letting the fibers speak for themselves, letting light and shadow fall across a surface has been such a critical part of my work, as opposed to, like, I loved what you said about paper being subservient. You know, it's not a place to hold ink, but to let those stories be told. And I think Mel and I both have a lot of interest in making invisible labor visible. And I think this is a prime example of that.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Such a beautiful piece.
So
that's just a little bit of the 7, the
they
rag
look great on
sorters,
that blue
and
wall.
then
Oh, I love it.
I should say all of that fabric that I pulled for this piece was white fabric, so I'm not altering the colors at all. There is a.
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna turn my video off to make
Yep,
sure.
okay.
Let's see. Okay, will that work better now?
Yeah, yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay,
So,
great. I'm sorry.
Courtney,
Oh,
where
I
do you
see
want to
what
pivot
happened.
to next? Okay, you're coming back to mine.
Or if you want to
That's-
just tell us a little bit about your process.
Sure. So I'm very invested in sacred geometry, which I think is a universal language of, perfection, perfect forms, circle, square, triangle. And I see it as a universal language that speaks to continuity, to perfection, to God, to all kinds of things that you will find referenced in cultural patterns throughout the world. And it doesn't seem to matter where you're looking and where you discover it. They all kind of come to the same meanings, and they're utilized for the same ways. And so that's very interesting to me, because it speaks to what we share rather than how divisive things have become. And I'm very interested in creating spaces that encourage contemplation or meditation, quiet spaces within public spaces that allow people to kind of come together and find commonality rather than to get, all worked up over what perceived differences seem to be exaggerating in our culture today. So the show that brought me to Columbia, Chicago in the first place was called Paper Cuts. And it was all our 7 women, again, that make their work simply by cutting paper. And when I had the opportunity to visit the paper studio, I made stencils based on some of my smaller paper cuts. And then we used those to create the pieces you're looking at now with pulp painting techniques. So you pull a base sheet, lay a stencil on it, and then you use colored pulp through the stencil, take the stencil off, press it under pressure, and then you get these pieces that are more physical in some ways than the paper cuts themselves. The paper cuts themselves are more sort of illusionary, so they reflect color off the backside, and so they feel less solid than the actual paper pieces themselves. But I think they speak to the same things. And yeah, I've worked with people all over the world, and even though we've had English language barriers, we've been able to communicate through the patterning. So it's been pretty interesting to prove out my thesis. So yeah, does that give you enough information, Courtney? I think so.
Yes, Rennie, or could you speak about why, when you were putting the exhibit together, you chose to work with women?
Well, I mean, for me, it just sort of was almost a default in some ways. I mean, I'm very delighted that it's all women. I wouldn't have been opposed to having a man in the mix. But when we started to pull it together with Melissa and I, and started working with the people that have gone through the Center for Paper, it sort of became about this group of women. And it's also women who are the primary practitioners of the craft in the first place. And so it's not really that surprising that it would be dominated by women. Although there are men who actually work in cast paper and pulp paper, handmade paper, but for me, it wasn't as conscious of a theme as it maybe was for Mel. Mel, do you want to?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily Rennie hit on the essential point, which is that book and paper programs are overwhelmingly women dominated. The hand paper making revival in the United States was not only women, but it was certainly majority women. And I will also just say that those women are grossly under-recognized for their contributions to intangible heritage development in this country, because the hand paper making movement here in the US is unlike anything else in the world in the ways that it went through because of American pedagogy in craft. Hand paper making and its movement through major institutions is totally distinct. And so our center was founded by women, and usually had primarily women students. So, and I think to take it a step further, there's probably it's not an accident that when women work in this medium, they're teasing out a lot of those ideas around invisible labors, the invisibility of the women who came before them, the lost histories of the women who came before them. So, I agree with Rennie too. It was natural that it came together this way. But we do have some extraordinary male paper makers at Columbia. One of them, Chris Flynn, is actually our master paper maker. He graduated from the MFA in book and paper as well. An incredible human who also worships paper as we do. So.
Do you want to look at any of the other pieces by the women who aren't in the chat, or we can talk about them for them, or? If you find one.
Yeah, Maggie, I can talk a little bit about Maggie.
Okay.
So Maggie came to the book and paper program very interested in book and print, and ended up like many do, falling in love equally with hand paper making. The city of Chicago is in some ways kind of a ground zero in socially engaged art. And so the influences that penetrate the city are very much about that. Maggie got very interested in working on issues around the Anthropocene, around climate crisis, and I want to give her a shout out that her deep dive into those questions really preceded current interest, and I believe that she should be credited in that way. A lot of her work is about biological diversity, looking at relationships between humans and the environment. The book that we just looked at is a really brilliant project called, that one is The Big Here, right, Rennie? But the way she builds these books is she creates handmade papers and asks questions about knowledge base around, what's the name of the #1 most important fish in the Chicago River, whatever. So she'll ask these questions about people's environmental knowledge, and they range from the ridiculous to the sublime, right? But they reveal a lot about our disconnect to our natural environment. And then she takes them and brilliantly assembles them into books that become records of the event where people would write on the wall. I think these are really special pieces. Maggie is still working in book and exploring now phonology wheels, which is another kind of sort of book-like object to explore seasons and changes in the environment. I believe this piece is called Scream of the Arctic. Is that right, Rennie?
No, it's the Anthropocene.
The Anthropocene. Okay, yeah, the Anthropocene. So Maggie also did a lot of work about the changing maps. And again, I just want to point out how prescient this work was, which was done now almost 10 years ago, and how radically quickly these changes are happening in ways that, perhaps we couldn't even chart with the kind of detail that Maggie did at the time. But using different colors of paper to look at the retreats of the ice caps, look at the changing environments of ecosystems upon which, of course, we're completely dependent for climate stability, that we now know are not just in grave danger, but may have already gone over the edge. I mean, talk about pulped under pressure. But so, these are hand cut, they're hand pulled pulp paintings, and then hand cut maps within that are collaged on top of the handmade paper. Maggie also sources a lot of her paper from the environment. So that, like a lot of these papers are made with corn, and some of the corn would have been grown by us, for instance, in the papermaker's garden. So there's always a metaphor embedded in the materiality of the fiber itself.
All right, and Maggie was one of the master printers who Mel set up for me to work with the first time I was invited to the center. And without her expertise, I mean, nothing would have happened.
But the students are always inventing things too. So Maggie decided to put Formation Aid, which is a way to basically make pulp paint flow, in the bottle itself. Hello, brilliant. I mean, I'd never thought about that. So, you know,
Well,
this
it worked the
was
first
a
time, and then
system.
when we came back the second time, that system didn't work.
Well, which is also paper.
And then
Paper
you
is so
walk in and go,
mercurial.
well, we'll just use a scoop in a squirt bottle.
Yeah, no, paper's super mercurial, and it's one of the reasons it's like really hard to teach in workshop, which is a nice segue to Jillian Bruchera, who's also in the show. Let's see if we can head over. I can talk about Trisha too, but
we can talk about Trisha, and then we can.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about Jillian. So Trisha is I mean, you know, totally extraordinary individual. Yeah, this wall here. So she came to the program a printmaker and became a paper maker. It's like kind of like a common theme in our MFA program. And she was. She got involved with the Field Museum. I took her into the depot with me at one point because I was really interested in looking at their methodologies of co-curation, and they have a Filipino collection. And it was like, it became kind of like the rest was history. Trisha is a Philam, she's a Filipino American. She did a lot of her work about the cultural exchange between the United States diaspora and her homeland, the Philippines. And so at the Field Museum, which is literally in our backyard at Columbia College, she was able to farm all of this incredible iconography and imagery that are present in the indigenous groups of the Philippines. She actually went with the Field Museum through a MacArthur-funded fellowship to study some of these symbol systems and collaborate with artists in the northern region of Luzon. I believe most of these images come from that. But like all international symbol systems, these are letters, these are words, you know, these all have deep meaning. And there's a tattoo artist up there, the last one of her kind. And Trisha was featured in an exhibition at the Field Museum with her caterpillar that, you know, is very abstracted, that, you know, looks similar to some of these symbols. But again, you know, these symbols are about the environments and the things on which the communities are dependent. And they end up in their textiles, which are their clothing, and of course their shelters as well. So
right, and what I remember from the conversation was this tattoo artist is probably close to 100 years old now. I think she's still living, and the way it's the old school way of creating the tattoos on the skin, and it can only be passed on through families of and you know, down through the generations of these different artists and artisans. And the younger generation is just not interested in learning that craft, if you will. And so it's really dying out. And like you were saying, Mel, the symbols that describe the locale where the mountains, the river, whatever, that come right out of a lot of the tattoo designs of that region. And I think it's a quite knockout piece. I think it's just kind of a stellar piece that just kind of has a wow factor.
Yeah, I mean, it reflects her heart and soul. It reflects a moment, you know, where her world kind of exploded in a wonderful way for her. Right. It's a monumental in that way. So yeah, this is Jillian Bruchera. Jillian Bruchera also graduated from the MFA in Book and Paper. This is a really interesting series. So Jillian is one of the most prolific artists I've ever worked with. I mean, she used to come to critique. I'd tell the students, like, do that much. She would come with like stacks and stacks and stacks of paper. And for her, a lot of the process was also notations around ideas that she was doing and working in at the time. So this was called Rules of Grammar, which was sort of early exploration of queer identity. And again, you know, at this moment, we now take pronouns for granted as identifying ourselves through our pronouns. But, you know, this work sort of preceded this idea of, like, you know, the queering of language and how we represent ourselves with words, with what we do, right? Doesn't ing always move, you know, that basically about the instability of language, which of course is the instability of our identities because we identify through our language. But she also is very interested in sort of queering the material itself, which is to say that she gets it everywhere. I mean, she is not afraid of the garbage that's at the bottom of the can rotting with people's hair and like thumbtacks in it. And so that's the foundation of her work. And what results are these incredible bricks. Talk about another, like I had never made a paper brick before, but she's like, I'm gonna make paper bricks. So, you know, she got a brick maker for fireplaces, and this material is all stuff that was literally thrown away. So, you know, metaphorically, it has a lot of real power to it in terms of like, don't you regret throwing all that away? I mean, when I look at this material, I think, wow, that was a bad choice. But I think that she also is she's a sort of magical recycler in that way. Her project, the mobile mill, which she's just recently relaunched, she teaches people hand paper making and does it a lot with found materials and in scales that are doable for people. One of the issues in hand paper making is the scale of the equipment is really not in range of most people, but Jillian is really interested in making it accessible with things that are sort of locally available so that one could dream to have a practice on a very modest scale by farming all that horrible stuff that still gives me the creeps. But
well, it's interesting too, those bricks are made, like you said, they're cast out of a mold, and it's not just paper-based trash. There's a lot of old technology embedded in the bricks as well. And so when you look up close, you'll see old cassette tapes or parts and bits and pieces of cell phones or remotes or cassettes or whatever have you. And so it really is a similar sort of commentary to what, Marilyn, you're addressing in terms of all this trash and that is just like inundating us everywhere we look. And that piece is interesting because it can be installed in any number of ways. And I haven't actually seen it like this sort of sloping wall before. I mean, it's been as a pile of bricks, it's been as a tower, it's been as a
in the middle of the room, sort of like a floor plan in the middle of the room. There was one like that.
Yeah, and so it's really, and it is called Waste Made. That's its name, made from waste, which is sort of similar to you too, Julia, in terms of what you did with rag sorters, because all that was made from waste as well. And so I think that, you know, that is another one of the sub themes. I think the way to recycle, to be sustainable, to draw attention to these concerns that we have about our environments, and and things that are normally not addressed, you know, things that are marginalized. So
yeah, and I think in this the rag sorters project, but also there's a beet papyrus piece. Part of what I was interested in is going beyond this contemporary notion of recycling and into the deeper dive of the history of using materials as if they were precious and to a point of exhaustion. That's like it's such an old cherished part, and it's very much a part of like how we've documented history. The substrates tell that story of using materials preciously and what we can learn from that to move forward. So I love that project of Jillian's, and I'm happy to hear that she started the mobile mill back up again. That's awesome.
Yep.
I want to add also, David and I were donated a van up here in Wisconsin. And so we've been going out and doing our press on wheels. And so I've been doing paper making probably, I would say 2 or 3 times a month we go out, and I set up the paper making area, and we call it make a sheet, take a sheet. So the previous participants have made all this paper. The new participants, they can't take that paper till they make a new sheet. So I help them to make some paper, and then they pick out a previous sheet, pick out a block that David has cut with the laser cutter, take it over to the etching press. He rolls it up and they crank it through, so they get the whole experience. And the paper I make for these events is shredded and blended office paper. So it has all these colors and words in it that show up. And so I'm having people, all these people say, would you teach me how to make paper? Please, can I do a workshop? So we've been going all over Wisconsin and Northern Illinois with our paper making, portable paper making. So I'm glad to hear that Jillian's starting hers up again, but I want to say that we're doing it too up here, and it's kind of a new and exciting thing. So
That's fantastic. And, you know, it is so accessible in some ways, you know, and then so affordable. I mean,
No,
because
I
it's
know.
just junk paper and water for the
Yep.
most part. And it's yeah,
but people
very
are,
demographic. I mean,
Yes.
democratic, you know, anyone
and
can.
people are amazed by it. They just love it. They love it.
Melissa and I did a workshop not too long ago where we did a collaboration with some blowout techniques at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And we thought we might just be working with students, but a lot of people from the community came in and they didn't want to leave. So it's the
Right,
same kind of
right.
thing. They
Yeah.
wanted, I mean, we just put them to work, let them pull all the paper. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So would love to do
Yeah.
that again.
I think what keeps me passionate about paper making is how dependent we are on it as a society, even as we veer towards being paperless, and yet how removed we are from its history, both the labor and materials that have gone into it. And part of that is the ability to study paper making in a college is becoming a more and more rare opportunity. And so while perhaps it's democratic through like the workshops, as universities become more and more efficient with space, let's just say.
Or they become more conceptual, you know, and not into the making of stuff so much.
Well, I think what we've, you know, like, well, anyways, this is a different conversation, but I would say the opportunity for a deep dive into the history and craft of paper making is becoming a more and more rare opportunity. And yet at the same time, we're seeing more and more people that are craving a material experience to ground them. And so there's this, there's not enough places to learn it, tons of people that want to, maybe not tons, but you know, it's an interesting, there's an interesting tension there.
I agree. That's a really great point, Julia. Really
Yeah.
great point.
Courtney, did you have anything else that you would like to add or ask, or I know we're coming up on time here.
Yes, I wanted to thank each of you for joining us today on this virtual experience here at the Pearl. I hope that you will be happy to know that we had 120 school children in here right before this opportunity to speak with you. And we explore the topic with them, where did paper come from? How is paper made? And they give you delightful answers such as paper came from a tree, paper's made in a factory. It's really interesting, but it's also very educational to talk about the history of the paper, the handmade process. So please know that we're helping to spread your message to all the third grade students that we've had tour through the museum. I want to thank you again for joining us today. And please, if there's something else that you'd like to share about Pulped Under Pressure, I'll give you each the opportunity.
I think we covered a lot of ground, so thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I do want to add, I made a video on making large sheets of paper. I had an intern from Carthage College make me a large decal box. So the video is on YouTube under, I think it's under Marilyn Propp large.
I shared a link with them, Marilyn. I mean,
Oh,
you
good.
should have that, Courtney, already, but if not, I can send it again.
Good, good.
All
It's
right.
a tutorial on how to make large sheets of paper.
Yeah, it's a great video
Good,
that
good.
would be really I mean, your students, your third graders would really come to a new understanding just by watching the video. Yeah. And it's not that long, so it would hold their interest.
Good.
So
Very good. Thank you, ladies, again.
you.
And please have a great weekend. Thank you again for joining us here at the Pearl.
thank you.
Courtney.
We really appreciate it. It's great to see all of you.
Good to
Yes.
see you all.
All right.
Wonderful.
So nice to see all your
everybody.
faces. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
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 Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, Rennie. Take care.